I'm a firmware engineer at Intel. I've been there for about 7 years now and worked with Lakshman for most of them. And so that's kind of what my role was on this project as well, was architecting and implementing a lot of the lower level firmware for this ventilator.
Okay. Did I miss anybody else from our team? I'm just going through. I think we got Randy, Jan, Mike, Brian. Anybody else on the call that I'm missing?
Is Rob going to be here? Is he not there?
I invited him. So missing our head medical officer. I'll let me text him and see if he's planning to join. I know we want to be efficient, but okay. Okay, I just pinged him. He might join. If he joins, we'll introduce him. Okay. Um, so, Brajesh, you want me to get started with the actual agenda now, with the what we want to cover? I take that as a yes. So I'll share my screen again. All right. So I want to make sure this is the kind of agenda put together. I think first thing I want to explain is what is the FDA emergency use authorization, introduce our device, what are the specifications, and then we'll talk through sort of the different, just a few minutes on each block to give an introduction to people and where to find the right information, right? So let's go and look at what is the FDA emergency use authorization. So if you go do a Google search and look for FDA EUA, you'll come to this page that I'm now sharing from the FDA. And what this is a really an emergency authorization to use the device. That's different. I want to be very clear, right? And this is important to say. An FDA approval is different than an emergency use authorization, right? So our device is EUA and is available for use under an emergency use authorization. And when you look through the authorized ventilators, there are quite a few, right, that were approved by the FDA. And if you go through this list, you'll see here, this is the LifeMac AVS. And here is what it says, right? Intent for use by qualified, trained personnel under the direction of a physician only when FDA cleared ventilator is not available during the COVID-19 pandemic. So, so this is what the device is. The the design I'm talking about today. So there is the FDA authorization for use. And then the design we're going to talk to is more general, and we will be referring to the capabilities of the design and not necessarily the device that is authorized. So there's a difference between the two. But since this session is about a tutorial about the underlying capabilities, we might mention features that are outside the scope of the authorization. But for the actual use and what it was validated for, we have to refer to the FDA authorization. So I just want to separate the two things before we get started. So to introduce our device, I pulled up the sort of instructions for use. Um, and really, a good place to start is the LifeMac website. It's lifemac.org. So you can go up there. There's a little video of the device. You can play the video. It'll show you the device working with the breath simulator. I won't do it right now, but if you want to go offline and look at it, and on the website is all the documents necessary to build this device, like the BOM, the block diagram, the repository for the software, the documents, the top-level mechanical assembly, the back squeezer assembly, electrical design, and all the cable diagrams. We will probably click through all these documents during the course of this presentation. And really, there's some introduction to this device over here on the website. So now, when you look at this device, I'll just go through a high-level overview of this. There's a lot of introductory material in this document. I'm just trying to find the right spot here. Introduction. So there's a user interface, and the idea of this is you can actually interact with this device and program it to do what you want. Brian will briefly cover that. The device makes use of these ambu bags, as they call it, as the main thing to pump air, and the motor actually controls this. And there's a bunch of theory of operation in this document. You can take a look at it offline, and a whole bunch of training requirements as well. And this is kind of what the device looks like. There is sort of the main components. There's this power button, a really loud alarm. There is a touch screen. There's a pressure port, which is the pressure sensor that is connected near the patient. And then there's an output flow that is connected again to the patient. And this sort of gives you an overview of the device. There's an emergency stop button so that if something were to happen, you can stop it. It takes a DC power jack with a 12-volt supply. And we'll go through the block diagram in greater detail. And these are all the different components. So here, this shows you all the different components that are needed to complete the device. You have the device itself, you have the power supply, you have the ambu bag, and then you have the breathing circuit that then goes all the way to the patient. And here is a diagram of how the different components are connected all the way to the patient. So we'll leave it at that, and I will briefly look at the specifications of the device. I think it is important to understand what the specs are. So in this document, I'm just looking for, I think the specs are in the appendix here. So it's important to understand these specifications, what they're intended for. And really, the emergency use resuscitator is capable of doing, 5 breaths per minute to 35. That's the range, and the volumes that it can support. It depends on how much breaths per minute, and it really supports a volume control mode, and that's the mode that this particular thing was designed to support. So you can look at the spec. It'll get you understand what this device is capable of, and so on. So I'll stop at that, and I would like to pass it on to Brian, and we'll start with the UI, which will tell you how the device can be used, and then we'll work our way through mechanical, electrical, software, and the test report. So Brian, you want to share your screen, or how would you like to do it?
Yeah, I'll share my screen. Sorry, I'm having to click through a bunch of menus to enable this. I haven't used this on this computer.
Fine, you can try now. You are co-host.
Yeah.
Just on the bottom of your screen, there will be a screen share.
Yeah, it's a privacy setting on my computer. Okay, let's see if this works. Sorry, guys.
It's fine. We can see your screen. No issue.
Oh, you can. Okay, good, great. All right. All right, let's go to the code here. So if you open up the repo, I'll just give you a quick tour of what's here. When you pull this down from GitHub, there's a folder called OVVEUI. That was the original name of the project. If you open that up, there's a Python file called ovveui.py. And this is the main top level Python file. The UI is written in Python and it's using PyQt 5 for the UI elements. There's a main down here at the bottom. And if you look at main, you'll see what the arguments that you can pass into the UI are. So there's a simulator mode that allows us to run the UI without being connected to hardware. And there's also a developer mode that allows you to trigger certain functions like alarm by using keys on the keyboard. So an important thing to understand is that this is there are two elements to the system. There's a Raspberry Pi that's running the UI. And then there's an Arduino that is running the controller. And these two things, they communicate. And so the UI is basically just listening for messages from the controller and responding to those and displaying the current state of the system. And there's some handshaking that goes on at init time. So if you want to play around with it locally without hardware, you can run it in sim mode and dev mode. So I'll run it here with these options. SW&D.
So you can run it. What you're saying is you can run the simulator on your PC without the hardware, correct?
Correct. Yeah. One note: the very tip of the develop branch, the simulator was not working for me. It's been like a year since I played with it, so I'm not exactly sure why. We added some things that were hardware specific right at the very end, so I had to go backwards a couple of commits in order to make the simulator work. So just a note if you do go play with it. But once you do that, you can click start. And this is just random data that it's plotting. You can interact with some of the UI elements, change the patient. So I won't go too far into that, but it's something you can play with. So in here, we do some argument parsing, and then we create the main window, and this is at the top of this file. If you go to the main window up here, you can see how we initialize everything, all the different Qt widgets and the logger, the stack of widgets for the UI, and then this is a key part. If we're not simulating, then we use CommsLink as our comms handler. CommsLink is the real implementation of the link to the microcontroller that's actually running the ventilator. Otherwise, it uses CommSimulator, which has the same interface, but it just simulates getting data from the comms handler. So, at a high level, that's how this gets set up. And then if you look in, the utils directory, there are various files in here describing what parameters are passed back and forth between the controller and the UI, ranges that are set for alarms that might get thrown, the format of the packets that get sent back and forth. At a binary level, this is how we're converting bytes from the microcontroller into data that gets shown in the UI. And then beyond this, there's a folder here called display, and these are the UI elements. So if I go into widgets.py, widgets, these are all the the respiratory rate widget. These are the things that show up in the UI, so you can change or look at how these things are created. That's like, super fast, but I don't want to take too much time on this because I know there's a lot to cover.
Thank you, Brian. So I just want to reiterate, hey, if you want to play around with the UI segment, it's all written in Python. You can actually run the UI without the actual hardware. The team built a simulator so you can play with it. I'll start sharing the rest of my screen, and I realized maybe we should have covered the block diagram first, but we are doing it for the first time here, so bear with me. So really, if you go to the website, the LifeMech website, there is a system block diagram. And you can kind of see here, the heart of the ventilator has these elements, right? There is the Raspberry Pi and the Raspberry Pi display, which where the UI runs, and the user can interact with the ventilator. There's a connection between the Raspberry Pi and an Arduino Mega. We have our own custom shield. The circuit diagram for the shield is available on the website, as well as all the collateral design files and so on. It communicates over the COM port. And then there is, for this particular version, we used a motor controller from a company called Nanotech and a stepper motor. And Randy can describe a little bit more in a second. And then we have really two sensors. There's a flow sensor and a pressure sensor, the two sensors that are used in the system. Randy, can you speak a little bit about the motor and sort of what that is all about, please?
Yeah, the stepper motor that we chose, there were a lot of, you have to realize there were a lot of independent efforts that were trying to do the ventilator development. And, most were using commonly available stepper motors. What we ended up doing was we realized that one of the limitations for this system was having enough power to squeeze the bag and to have the responsiveness so that we could make sure that we could control it precisely. And to that end, what we did was use a really, a strong industrial supplier, Nanotech, one of their more powerful stepper motors, and basically overkilled the requirement. We could probably back off of that requirement and use a less expensive stepper motor, but we built it into a closed loop system with an optical encoder on the shaft so that we could precisely control the position, velocity, and be assured that we'd never be missing steps or skipping steps, which was a real problem in the early running on this. So not only is the stepper control loop a closed loop system, but the breathing control system that Jan worked on with the PID algorithm that he coded is also a closed system, so that we have direct feedback and very precise control of every element really of the airway.
Thank you, Randy. I want to take a small segue out of the design to talk a little bit about when we designed this, we wanted the system to be adaptable to other systems. And while our initial version focused on the AmbuBag, Jan and Randy also built a version that replaced the motor. Again, all the components are the same, the software is the same. They replaced the motor with a blower. And that particular version was not authorized by the FDA, I have to say that. It was a prototype, but I would like Jan to describe how he took this system and then modified it to control a blower. Jan?
Okay, yeah. So the idea or the challenge with the AMBU bag is that once you compress this bag, it's basically full of nonlinearities, and it can also reach, depending on the settings, you can kind of come into the situation that it's not inflating quickly enough, so you can't get enough air, and this limits the performance of the device. And the much nicer option was actually to use a blower motor, and should have brought one to show you here, but I didn't. So it's basically a brushless motor, sensor brushless motor, which is very precisely controlled and can also be monitored pretty well because you know the RPM and everything. And we basically just replaced the command for the stepper motor to move with a speed command of this blower motor, and scaled the command accordingly, and basically gave it back into the same feedback algorithm. And since it's quite robust, the algorithm, it basically picked up very quickly the speed and the performance of this motor, and we were able to achieve much higher breathing rates and much higher volumes with this. We also see that the simplicity of this setup. Oh yeah, I think Randy has one blower actually showing in this camera. Maybe Randy speaks so you pop up for everyone.
Yeah, this is the blower that he's talking about. It's much smaller than the AMBU bag. This is literally the breadboard that we were using to model this system on. And this is a blower replacement for the stepper.
So there's a software branch for the embedded code which basically does that, and the blower is far not as well tested as the AMBU bag, but it is an option to expand this further and to test that further, and it's for sure the nicer and more robust and smaller version, and it's not depending on the stepper motors, which are at varying availability and quality. So yeah, it has advantages. It has also disadvantages. Maybe stepper motors are easier to get, and maybe AMBU bags are easier to get. The AMBU bags themselves are medical approved devices for contact with patients. So this is also an advantage. The blowers which we used were also medical blowers, but obviously they were pretty expensive. So you maybe would want to replace them with something cheaper. Technically, you could go as cheap as making 3D molded blower parts and taking brushless motors from other markets like drones, where basically a motor costs just a couple of $10 or so, or maybe $15, $20. So you could technically build the blower for in the order of magnitude of like $30 to $50 compared to the stepper motor, which costs currently $250 or so, plus AMBU bag and so on. So it is some potential, but obviously the low-hanging fruit to get something up and running quickly is the AMBU bag.
Sure. John, we'll go with anything which is replicable faster.
They're both replicable. Go ahead.
Well, not really. We haven't really finished the blower design.
Yeah.
Sure.
I would also say the more robust version, more robust or more tested version is for sure the AMBU bag version. And if it's about speed, it's most likely better to go with that. The blower version has a lot of things still open to optimize. And it's maybe also depending on the amount of systems you want to build.
Focus on AMBU. Let's focus over there.
Okay, so let's. I want to read. So the reason why I brought up the blower is to say that look, we designed the system with the AMBU bag as a point in time to say, okay, this is working. It's got the FDA authorization under emergency use, but the system is in general flexible, so that if you want to enhance it and build it further, you can replace components and reuse everything to build a more, I would call it, closer to a commercial grade device, right? You can keep moving the technology forward. And that was the point of discussing that. So let me get back to showing the rest of the system. Let me share my screen again. So far we talked about the Raspberry Pi and the UI. You can look at the Arduino Shield. I'll describe the hardware and then we'll dive into the Arduino software. So we have the Arduino Mega, and there's a little shield which has connections to the pressure sensor, the flow sensor, the connection to the motor, Raspberry Pi, power button, the alarms, right? So it's a very simple shield that allows you to easily build the device. It's a simple 2-layer PCB that we built. I think many projects are building these shields, and that makes it easier for you to connect it. So now what I want to do is to get into we looked at the UI software. It's all in the GitHub. The next part is the controller software. And again, you can click in there, and I'll let Mike Rosen, who was instrumental, Mike and the team were instrumental in putting this, many contributors, you can see them all here. Mike, do you want to sort of share your screen and do an overview of the controller software?
Sure.
I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay. I was just looking at Jan's blower implementation because I hadn't looked at it in a long time.
So if you want, Mike, you can go through the embedded code and I can explain the controller if you want.
Sure. I think I was going to call on you to explain the controller code because Jan and others mostly worked on that. But just from a high level, the overall kind of design constraint we were working with was an attempt to write all this code in such a way that it was as robust as possible, but still able to just compile it using the regular Arduino tools. So you wouldn't need anything special to do that, which is, if you look through this and you're used to embedded firmware design, you might be wondering why some things are the way they are. But that was the constraint we were working with. The code is basically broken down into a few main components. There is the main loop, which we'll actually look a little bit into in a second in the main.cpp. There are, for each kind of large component we had in the system, we broke them down into modules. All the code for those are in the modules directory. That covers the control loop to actually control the stepper motor or blower, depending on the design. The link module, which was responsible for communicating back status to the Raspberry Pi, as well as get commands from the Raspberry Pi in order to set the mode and things like that. The parameters were intended to store and basically serve as an intermediary and a check for anything that was given by the Raspberry Pi as, set the various parameters to these. But we also want to check them and make sure that they're stored and restored in the event of any kind of problem. So that's what that module is for. And then lastly, the sensors module is responsible for getting the feedback from the pressure sensor and from the airflow sensor we have in our system in order to form a closed loop. So we'll look at those in a second, and then kind of just going over a few other pieces of the code on a higher level. The Hal Layer, as is typical for Hal Layers, is just a way to abstract away some of the APIs for the the various things we were running on, an API to abstract away the motor, the I2Cs, things like the alarms, and the sensors are all in here. So that the modules can use the HAL APIs rather than trying to use APIs directly accessing the hardware itself. Our system also, in order to try to make it multi-threaded without installing a full RTOS, uses something called Protothreads. That's what's in this PT module, in this PT directory is the implementation for that. So that's something the modules leverage in order to try to better handle certain waiting conditions and whatnot. And then the Util Directory is just for a bunch of utility type things, things like logging, erasing alarms that are kind of all throughout the system, and other common pieces of code that we need. And as Lakshman said, this is all on GitHub. I don't know necessarily how readable this code is, but by and large, the structure is that in the main, we have a main setup, which maps directly to Arduino setup, which does the initial configuration of everything and calling the initialization for all of the Hal Layer items, as well as all the initialization for the module layers. And then the main loop itself goes into actually running all of the modules in turn, running first the control module to run the control loop, running the sensors module to get data from the sensors, parameters module to update any of the parameters, and the link module to do with any of the communication necessary. It also contains a few of the important pieces of code for raising certain what we'll call extraordinary alarm conditions, things like the emergency stop being pressed, or handling power on, power off. The code is also in here. In terms of the modules, which I'll pass over to Jan to explain the control loop, because I think that's kind of the heart of the system. And that's what's contained within this file. So Jan, do you want to explain the controller?
Yeah, sure. Should I quickly share my screen?
Yeah,
sure. Got a lot of large echo somewhere. Okay, let me see. So you should be able to see some code here. Okay, great. So this is the controller unit, and as many C units, you basically start reading it from the lowest function to the highest function. So in the lowest function, we basically have just the run and init module function, which you see here continuously runs the control thread. And the control thread is basically a large state machine here. Gonna start here. So we have control states. If you look at them, from home to idle to begin inhalation, begin hold in, begin exhalation, and the calibration states. And basically the state machine goes through all of these states and does the respective functions. The main things to notice is the motor H commands basically are here in this sense position commands to the motor, so where to go with the motor, and then the no, I'm sorry, it's if I remember correctly, it's speed commands in the end. So it goes to open and close, and you basically give it a speed what the motor should do. And the main control loop is basically starting from idle to begin inhalation. And in inhalation and begin inhalation, it's just basically just running through one state and does the initialization of it. And in state inhalation, it completely does one inhaled cycle. And this is done through update control here in the sense. So what's happening is that we generate a trajectory, what we want to basically have or assume for this breathing cycle. And we control the flow based on this trajectory. And this is basically happening in update control. So you find here very typical PID controller with limits on the I part, couple of limits on the outputs. And this PID controller is basically doing the inhalation state and based on the trajectory. And the trajectory is what is defined at the very top here and also described in a comment. So we basically start with, okay, we have a certain time and volume which we want to reach. And after we do one cycle, we basically see what happened during that cycle. Did we reach our time? Did we reach our volume? And how did the plateau pressure versus peak pressure look like? And all of this is basically by cycle, a higher level, by cycle controller, which adapts the cycle so that all parameters are met. And so usually what you would see on the lung simulator is if you would connect everything in the beginning, the system, if you would set it to 500 milliliters and 25 breaths, it would start with, I don't know, 300 milliliters and 20 breaths. and then work its way up. So all the initial values are relatively conservative so that we don't go above the values, but then it kind of adapts to everything in the system which is erroneous and takes basically the sensors as reference, so that in the end, timing and volume and plateau versus peak pressure are met. And usually this adaptation takes about 5 to 10 cycles, and afterwards it's stable. We put a lot of effort so that it does not overshoot. There are a couple of defines which kind of define how these adjustments are made. They are kind of set by experiment and verified through the process with the FDA that we really don't overshoot. There are a couple of safety measures in place here. So let me find, where was it again? So we have, for example, here pressure limits and flow limits. So if you set a certain flow and we go above 20%, we stop it right away. If you set a certain maximum pressure, I think it's a parameter even in the UI which you can set. It only uses a certain maximum amount of pressure, and if this is not hit, it will first back up and at some point stop even. So here's the basically backup on the control volume, what it does, so that you never exceed one of the parameters you've set. Yeah, so this is something which eventually, obviously, like things like parameters and so on are hand tuned. If you really so whoever wants to use this, most likely it's robust enough to just give it a go and a try on a simulator first. If you have a specific question, I think I would spend more time then to help you get up to speed, because this is obviously a little bit complicated how everything is connected together, and it grew over time. So with the different layers of adaptation and different layers of control, it's on the one hand somewhat very robust, on the other hand a little bit complex. There's one function which is this part. If you see something like phase shift compensation, this is taking into account that the flow does only start once you hit the back. So the lever of the system hits the back, but the flow only starts once the back squeezed a certain amount. And in order to really be on time with when the flow starts and follow the trajectory, we estimate this dead time in the movement and phase shift basically to the point where really flow is generated. And this also makes sure that we are super precise on what we output in terms of milliliters and timing.
Hey, Jan. Hey, guys.
Yeah.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hey, this is Maher Daoudi. And I just want to say thank you, Intel team, and thank you, Docs, and thank you, everybody in here in the Pillar Tribe. I really appreciate what you guys are doing. We're joining this coalition, and I'm listening in, and it's epic, and y'all keep rolling. I just wanted to kind of say hello, how you doing? I'm here with Stephanie. She's over at the CVS pharmacy here. I'm getting my COVID shot, and we're making it happen, guys. You guys keep rolling, okay?
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Maher, for getting us all together.
You're very welcome. You guys keep doing your thing, man. I'm just observing and in awe and grateful and honored to be one of the guys that mobilize you guys. Y'all just keep going, and I'll do my best to support you as best as I can, okay?
All right. Thanks, Maher.
Don't faint when you get the shot.
I hope that. India will be a little tougher on the stomach than the shot, I promise you, right? But we'll be all right. We'll be all right. Yeah.
So to get to do some last comments.
Yeah.
Here. I just wanted to highlight that there is quite some log data available for analyzing what's happening here. So the UI logs a lot of data from the controller, and there are even possibilities to use the plot function from Arduino in order to see what's happening. This might be turning out useful during bring up and so on. That was my last comment.
All right. Thank you, Jan. I want to, Mike, do you want to cover anything else, or shall I kick back to sort of a higher layer testing and other elements?
I think the controller is really the heart of it, and so the rest of it is not particularly interesting. It's just reading through that code, so it makes sense to continue on.
Okay. Okay. Let me pull up my agenda and make sure the software. We said look at the test report next. So let me share my screen. Share my screen. Where did that? Let's share my screen. Tab 2. So I want to briefly touch through. In the end, this document is not public, and if somebody wants it, let me know, and I will share it or will put it up on the website. So part of what we had to do was to once we built all this, this had to go through a fair amount of, like Randy said in the beginning, kind of rigorous FDA testing for getting the emergency use authorization. So I want to go through some of that. And Randy, would you like to kind of at a high level describe how the test setup and how we tested it, and then I'll delve into some details. Do you mind?
Sure, I can do that. When we started the development, we only had a bit of a breadboard. Everything was spread out all over the place. We didn't have any enclosures and anything like that. And as it came together, we found that we needed to measure all the attributes of the system. We had to put it in a real environment. So as the enclosure came online and as we had some equipment delivered or lent to us by OHSU and Kaiser, we set the lab up basically to do the required measurements for the FDA's emergency use authorization. This entails different constraints for breathing rates, volumes, and pressure with pressure limits, and measuring the flows, pressures associated with each of those waveforms. And then we had to actually look at the data that was collected through the instrumentation attached to the ventilator and an artificial simulation of a lung. What was it called? I forget what it's called, Lakshman. What's the thing that we've got now?
Michigan lung?
Yeah, the Michigan lung. It's a mechanical spring-loaded assembly that mimics the function of the lung so that we can measure with resistance and constriction the function of the ventilator. So that was actually a pretty involved data collection effort. We ran it multiple times. We ended up trying to understand what the reality of the effect was if a human was attached to it. Now, we've never done any animal testing with this, but we've done the simulation, the lung simulation testing, and it basically involves a lot of processing of the waveforms and data collection over varying constraints. The hardest parts of this are when you have highly restricted and constricted lung functionality and you are trying to do rapid breathing for a patient, and trying to get as much volume into the lung as possible. That's actually not very easy to do. And so we spent quite a bit of time tuning those systems so that we could, as Jan pointed out, start the system up and very quickly adapt to a circumstance where we could do the best against the target for the simulation conditions. So it was pretty involved, lots of post-processing. We've got a pretty extensive report, that shows what the functionality is. We would have to, in any other modification or or back end change out like a blower type situation, redo all of that for sure. And it would be much more extensive if we were going for a full FDA approval. It'd be much more involved than this. There were lots of different effects we found, and none of them were as straightforward as you would think. Identifying breath stacking, incorporating the resistance of the tubing to the patient, where the resistance is attached and where you measure the different pressures was all a real journey of discovery for us. So I think that it seems straightforward, but you have to have the exactly right setup to make sure that you're measuring what you think you're measuring.
Thank you, Randy. I'll just pull up the report here and start just scan the document. So just to give an idea of what level of testing we had to do and so on. So there's this whole test report. This is the test setup. It's the standard from the ISO standard, standard picture from the ISO standard. And this is kind of the block diagram that was used in the test, which is the user input, the tubing. It describes the diagram, the virus filter, and then going off to the test lung, as well as the flow sensor that was part of our setup, right? And then you think there's some oxygen supply that's going into the ambu bag, right? And the test protocols are specified by the ISO standard, and the different things on different rates, and the tests are very specific, right? The standard specifies all these tests that your ventilator has to prove, has to complete successfully in order to meet the performance, right? So it has the what is the compliance, which means the resistance of the what is the linear resistance in what is the air tube resistance?
That's the constriction. That's the constriction of the airway.
Yeah, the constriction of the airway, which represents what you might have fluid in your airway path, and then the compliance is how bad the lungs are,
how elastic they are.
Yeah, and then we added a few tests in the end that represent the lungs of a COVID patient, potentially 10 and 11 tests, which is very high resistance compliance. It can make it really hard for the ventilator to pump in. So we added those two tests. And then there's some acceptance criteria we had. And pretty much we ran all these tests, and this kind of tells you what are this test setup, and then you can. I'll just skip through this. There's a lot of there's a summary table here in the document of each one of the tests. How did it perform? What is the error? What is the standard deviation? Error range. I don't say standard deviation, just the error range. Maybe there was standard.
Do you show any of the waveforms?
I'll show it. Yeah. So
there they are.
And then for each report, we had to calculate the flow waveform, the pressure waveform, as well as the tidal volume being delivered for each one of the ISO tests. So you should go through this report. You'll see a whole bunch of these for different conditions where pressure was measured at different points in the tube. There are about, I don't know the exactly number of tests we ran. I think it's in the table here. 10 tests across two different, and there are many more tests that we had to run, which was, this is the basic waveform test report. There was also another test report, another test that we had to do, which is to keep the ventilator running for a long period of time to ensure that nothing breaks.
Yeah,
right?
Pre-testing with the suite, and then running for 24 hours, and then post-testing with the suite to show fatigue of the ambu bag, variation of the system over a prolonged operation, and so forth.
Sure. There is one, I think the one part that we're almost running out of time. There is one part that we do need to cover, and I'll cover it briefly, which is the mechanical side of all of that. I realized we just skipped it. So I want to quickly go back and just cover this, and then we'll close out on next steps in just a few minutes. Jason, I'm sharing the back squeezer. So you want to sort of give an overview of, I'll show the picture. We want to give an overview of this.
Yeah, I can share things too if you like.
Okay, so go ahead and share, and then we'll come back to.
Thanks, by the way, for skipping me. So
I know. Sorry about that. I'll edit this video so that I'll stick you back in the beginning.
I just wanted to say, I just see Randy Steck on the screen here. I don't know what's happening.
Yeah,
but I just wanted to say that listening to Brian and Mike and Randy and Jan talk about the code, and you, Lakshman, running through the testing routine, it sounds like all this was kind of baked and it just happened. But what I wanted to emphasize first was the spirit of prototyping that spanned all the disciplines of the project, including mechanical. But it was amazing the amount of development and prototyping and evaluation, the cycles that went on over the 7 weeks of this project to make this thing happen. So if any team in India is trying to reproduce this work, I think that's something to look forward to, at least, is that excitement and spirit of prototyping. The bag squeezer, I still just see Randy Steck on the big screen here, but that's okay. This is the bag squeezer here, yeah. And so the emphasis for the mechanical team, and I just led the team, by the way, it was much better engineers than I that actually did this, Alex Urson and Scott Pontoni. They determined early on that the emphasis to make this thing work would be to squeeze it like you're duplicating the human hand squeezing the bag. So this let's see if I can share my screen here. Yeah. All right, you guys seeing that? So this is the bag squeezer, and what it does is it mimics the human hand. So there's the palm, the hand, and the thumb that actually drives into the bag to squeeze it. And in making this architecture to hook a motor up to an arm to squeeze it into a palm or a hand to squeeze the bag, what we were trying to do was use the bag as it was intended and to deliver the volume needed and also to protect the bag from driving the thing so hard to deliver the volume that you need. So it was this kind of cyclical architecture that helps protect and use the bag to its greatest advantage. And finally, I just wanted to say, just to wrap this up quickly, in looking at the squeezer here, one of the other points we tried to make throughout the whole prototyping process was to use materials as efficiently as possible and easily as possible. So it's 3D printed plastic parts, very simple laser cut sheet metal parts, and off-the-shelf hardware for everything else. So it should be very easy to put together in an emergency situation like this. Anyway, that's all I've got, Lakshman, unless you want to see a little movie.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to. If you have a movie, you can share.
Oh, yeah?
What do you want to share?
let's do this.
Yeah, please share the movie.
All right, we'll do the movie. Just a fast one. Okay. This is just a quick one that highlights, as the weeks went by, how this thing looked. Here's a cut acrylic version with a custom gear reduction, and then it quickly developed into using motors that had gear reduction built in, and of course taking advantage of the sophisticated control software from Jan and Randy and John. And I don't know if you can hear the sounds, but it's noisy as hell, but a lot of that noise was eliminated and Jan and Randy and John are refining the controller software, so it sounds much quieter now. Anyway, there you have it.
If I could just add one thing, we talked, Jason talked a lot about the spirit of prototyping. We know a lot of ways not to do this now.
Saving a life is no easy task. Options for treatment vary based on.
The movie kept playing. That's right, Randy.
All right. So let me circle back on one last thing and then we'll wrap here. Share screen. Number 2. The a couple of other things. There is the assembly document, which actually tells you how this entire thing is assembled. So there's step-by-step guidance on starting with, how we get this box to how do you enclose it, how do you put it all together. There is instructions on how to build this whole thing, right? Down to every screw. I'm just quickly, you can go look at these documents. They're fairly detailed that Braxton developed. I don't know if he's on the call, but it tells you how to build all of this. Down to, how to wire the thing. I'm just skipping through all of this, right? So you can go look at this documentation. It gives you step-by-step instructions on how to build every aspect of this. It's in the website for anyone to go reproduce if they want to. And then there are also very fine cable diagrams that tell you how to wire up and build all the cables that are needed. I think Jason did an excellent job of sort of describing every cable, the bill of materials, the length, what is needed. There are probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cables to build. The final, I'll stop sharing here. Sorry, I'm not sharing anything. So here is all the cable diagrams. And then previously when I was talking, I was actually referring to this top level assembly here, which goes through all the fine details of how to build this. I'll put it in this view so you can see it. So the assembly instructions are on the website. So no point going through each one, but it's down to there are 107 pages of documentation that goes through every step of how to build the device. The last thing I will say is if anyone wants to build this, I have parts for 10 units sitting in a factory, like a kit that we can send. If somebody really wants to build this, I'm happy to support them, and we can ship all the units if you want to try your hands on building them.
I want to build it. I want to build it in the Stack Factory. Send it over there. We're going to build it and stream it. Me and Vivek are going to build it, bro, over there at the Stack Factory. So send it over there. With Brajesh will give you the address. I'll go to India. We'll build the aux kit and we're going to hook it up to your ventilator, bro.
Sure. So, I mean, we can send the parts. We have 10 motors, 10 of everything. Beyond 10, we don't have parts right now. But if anybody wants to get going and you're up for it, the instructions are all there. The team here, if you're building it, the team here would be more than happy to sort of be your supporters, answer questions, whatever. I'm sure I'll be happy to, and I'm sure many of us, we like for this to be useful. So one of the reasons why we prepared all these documents is to enable something like that if anybody wanted to build.
Guys, I would like to introduce Dr. Mamta. Mamta, would tell about yourself. turn on your mic and just introduce yourself, what kind of work you're doing on ground.
Sure. Hi, guys. Thank you so much for the work that you guys have done. This is amazing. I'm sorry I can't turn my camera on. I'm driving. But I had a question, and I apologize if you already went over this. But is there a PEEP controller and a pressure controller with the volume that is going in, or a pressure control that is actually read in the like with the volume that's delivered? And is there a way to control the PEEP that's given?
There's a manual PEEP valve attached to the end of the ventilator tube, and we do measure the PEEP pressure.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Yep.
Yeah, and maximum pressure is controlled and limited.
Great. So it's a volume controlled, pressure limited system then, correct?
Yes,
Yep.
correct.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, by the
And,
way, guys, just real quick before I forget, let me my ADD insert. We got Georgia Tech involved. So Mirza over there, and they got fellows at Georgia Tech. You could also send a package over there. They'll be happy to build the unit there. They're building OxyKit at Georgia Tech as well. So it'd be nice to get the whole Georgia Tech makers labs guys involved in building the LifeMech ventilator too, if you guys would like that.
Happy
And
to
also-
support. Please just contact on the WhatsApp channel anybody who wants to build. Give me the addresses. I'm happy to ship the units that we have and support whoever wants to build this.
Sure.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Could you actually send this to India for me?
Yes.
Okay, fabulous.
Now, I want to say that so there is the FDA. The FDA approved version, the code is tagged, not FDA authorized, and I didn't say approved, FDA EUA authorized version, the code is tagged in the database. Beyond that, we did implement a few other features that were not fully tested or authorized or approved. It's in the code base. Some of that includes support for spontaneous breathing. We have tested sort of limited testing of that. The code is in the lab. So the reason I'm mentioning that is if somebody is going to build this, it would make sense to test the other enhanced capabilities that were added after the FDA EUA, which includes support for spontaneous breathing. And then if someone wants to really do it, there is the early prototype of the blower version that is also available. So I'll leave it. I will leave it at that. All the code is open source. Everything is licensed under an MIT type license, which means there is no copy left or no strings attached. This is a complete philanthropic effort that we did out of we didn't know what to do, so we did something. We're happy to see this move forward if anybody wants. So the one last thing is when I ship, whoever wants to, I will not be able to ship the battery. So you would need to find a good 12-volt battery that will fit. We're using a standard motorbike battery. So if you have a motorbike, you can fit you'll have to find a 12-volt battery. That is something that I'm sure all the amazing things that people in India are doing, finding a 12-volt battery would be easy.
Yeah, I think the one that we're using is a lithium iron sulfate battery.
Yeah, and you can change the battery and change the charger that corresponds to that battery. That's the only thing I can't ship because it will make the shipping not safe.
Hey, let's get the Tata consulting engineers to build it too.
Okay, so I have to drop to another meeting. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit late to go on to that. It's related to all this project. Deepti's organized it, so I would like to drop off. And thank you so much, for Brijesh and Mahir for organizing this. We've been sitting on this. We are really thrilled that somebody wants to listen to us and wants to do something with it. So this is. For me, that's sort of as much as I don't want anybody to, when we built this, we're like, I hope this device is never be needed, and we built it. But if it's needed, then that's good, right? So anyway,
perhaps we can connect offline then, because I'd like to be able to feature what you guys are doing on our website so that we can get it to the hospitals that need it, and allow individuals to build what you're doing, and feature it in a way that is feasible for individuals to build it. So perhaps Brajesh, maybe you can connect us offline.
Sure, Mamta, there is a process for that. You will be connecting to our maker community. So we have a distributed maker community on our Skillvo platform. We have a different platform called Skillvo, which is dedicated for decentralized manufacturing. And this team is focused on central command control for knowledge transfer and purchase automation. So right now,
That's fine.
team is focused on.
You can
I'll
tell me
connect
that
you.
stuff offline. Yeah.
Hey, thank you very much, Arun. I have to drop off now. Bye.
Sure, Lakshman. We'll continue for 15 minutes and then we'll wrap up.
The others can stay on if they want to answer questions. Bye.
Sid, please ask your question. Sid, are you there? Okay, Ravi, Kamlesh, Ardino, Ravinder, it's a pop-up style. You can start asking questions. Turn on your camera and then.
May I go ahead and ask some questions?
Sure.
Everyone can turn on your camera and it's a pop-up style. Start asking.
So I had a question regarding whether it has been really tested on humans. So I understand that there has been testing and FDA approval for emergency use, but is there any testing done on real humans?
No, we did not get to human testing. We stopped short of animal testing. Once we got the EUA, we saw that there was really no need as was anticipated for it. So you'd have to go through those steps. I don't know how much you would want to trust the EUA evaluation, for human testing. There's obviously a lot more you have to put into it than that, but that's obviously the next step.
Well, I would jump in and just recommend that, as a last resort, right? If there's nothing else to use but this, it would make sense to try it out so you don't die, right? At least you have an option.
Well, that was always the intent. This was not made to replace commercial ventilators for sure.
Exactly. And right now in India, like with the OxyKit, I believe we have about 8 to 15 different hospitals, including military hospitals, that want to take the OxyKit and put it into clinical trials. And that'll be a great opportunity while they're building the machines out there at the Stag factory and TCE hopefully getting involved to validate, and they could take that design and they quickly potentially replicate it. And then we could use it in the clinical trials and pitch it to the hospitals that are already doing the OxyKit clinical trials. Talk to Lakshman. If OxyKit could power that ventilator, we could hopefully have it in the emergency use need that it was made for fairly soon, as quickly as maybe next week.
Well, I know there's some existing boxes. You might be successful at getting some of those and deploying them. What do we have? I think Lakshman built 10, or maybe he's just got parts for 10, but they should go together pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think he said he has parts for 10, Randy.
Well, I'm not sure how many we actually have right now. It's like 4 or something.
Yeah, good point.
Is there any plans to test these here in the States?
No, we have not. We've not planned on doing any further testing on it because we found that there wasn't any need. We have talked about and sort of looked at what the possibilities would be to addressing more than emergency use, lower cost ventilators, third world deployment, not as capable as commercial ventilators, but much more portable. But no, we found that there was really no opportunity to proceed on those.
Got it. Something you guys may want to look at is for donors. There are there are quote unquote hospitals or centers for donors who are going to do like living donor things, or not living, but they're deceased donor stuff, where we keep patients or we keep bodies alive. And they have centers there that you could potentially tap into to see if they, because there's no harm, no foul at that point, to exchange, you know, a commercial ventilator for one of these ventilators to see how it compares to a commercial ventilator. That's a possibility if you're interested in that.
Yeah, I think we'd leave that to somebody else that was wanting to extend the reach of the ventilator that we've currently designed.
Mamta will send one kit to you, and you just make the report. You take the lead and just send us the data. We have a limited time constraint. Our team is very.
Sorry, I had a quick question. I don't know if it was covered earlier because I was in another meeting. So what's the costing we are talking about in terms of the prototype level itself? And if you're going for bulk production, do you have any estimate of costing?
I'm sorry, you're asking about the cost of the system?
Yes. So if you can give the prototype level cost and an estimate for bulk production.
Yeah, that's, you know, a lot of that is involved in the volume purchase prices, obviously. I don't know where we ended up with on the price or the cost for components for the existing system. We'll have to ask Lakshman that. He's got that data.
Thank you.
It always was a factor. We didn't want to do, as you see, we were using Raspberry Pis and Arduinos and, you know, cheap, you know, sheet metal where possible and things like that. But that doesn't mean it doesn't run into the, you know, couple $1,000 costs.
No, I completely understand. So we also try to, so by the way, I'm from the University of Cambridge. So we also have an open source ventilator as a part of our global challenge research. So we know that how it goes. So that's definitely it. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, guys, hey man, I just want to say thank you guys. I'm gonna have to drop in a second, but I do want to let y'all know there's an opportunity. I'll be going over there to India. We have clinical trials set up for the OxyKit in about 8 different hospitals already. Lakshman has an OxyKit over this place. He tunes it up, makes it work with the ventilator. You get it in my hands. When I go into those clinical trials and we hook them up to patients, invite the media, I'd love to have LifeMake there as part of that system we hook up, and they're ready to go because people are dying everywhere. This is the perfect case for the system that was created, and I would love to take it there with us and present it if
well, you got it. You know, you'll get you get some more information from Lakshman soon, I'm sure.
Yes, sir. Yeah, me and him talk regularly, so we kind of got this thing started. But thank you everybody for your hard effort. I know you guys spent a year. You had the first wave went down, and then people didn't take it seriously. Now they're taking it seriously. This is not going to stop. It's going to hit country after country after country. Unfortunately, if we're following the 1918 flu pandemic, there's even going to be a third wave. So the work you guys have done, it's just timing. This is the right time. Good work. Thanks for grinding. You guys are superheroes.
All right. Hopefully we can help.
Yep. See you guys.
All right. Cheers.
I'd like to say the same thing. That thank you very much. It's a great effort you have put together.
Yeah. Let us know where we can help.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, bye.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks a lot, all. Really appreciate your support.
Good seeing you guys, you know, Jan and Jason again. All right. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay, so Sagar will connect on WhatsApp, and Arnold, are you there? We'll connect on WhatsApp.
Yeah, I'm there. So I just wanted to know, Brijesh, that whether this can be shipped to Mumbai, and if we can start on manufacturing it, because we have a manufacturing facility at Mumbai.
Okay, the plan is like similar to OxyKit, just replicate it.
Okay.
You need a pass by those need servo motor and controller, and all code, everything is open source. So you can just start updating it. So immediately after this meeting, we'll come to a WhatsApp, and please join our Discord channel. Create a specific channel on ventilators, and since you end of the video, I'll ensure both of you get one units so that you can start getting it. Okay.
Right. Exactly.
Pritesh, can I have a minute, please?
बताओ ना.
Where are you from?
I don't have a specific location. I keep on traveling, so I don't have a fixed location. I don't have permanent address.
Okay,
So right
I
now,
am. Sorry, your voice is not audible.
Right now, I'm in a village in Bihar.
Okay, this is not audible. What I'll do is I'll connect on that WhatsApp group and give you a call on that number, if possible, right away.
Sure, you can connect on WhatsApp. I was saying I'm in Bihar. There's a small village in Bihar.
I think like.
If you have any question, you can ask us.
I'm not like audible properly. I'll connect to you on a call, okay?
Sure.
Can you just give me a second? How do I get that message again? I'm really new to this Zoom chat. Okay. Okay. I'll find your number and I'll